The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the dusty trading post in Challis, Idaho Territory, and Zara Sullivan's stomach twisted with a fear so profound she thought she might be sick right there on the worn leather seat. It was September of 1878, and the autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled in the Rocky Mountains. Through the smudged window, Zara could see rough-looking men in wide-brimmed hats and dusty boots watching the stagecoach with open curiosity. Her hands trembled as she smoothed down the gray traveling dress she had worn for 3 endless weeks across the country from Philadelphia. The dress was wrinkled beyond repair now, and she probably looked as exhausted as she felt, but vanity seemed a foolish concern when her entire body thrummed with terror. The driver opened the door and offered his weathered hand. Zara took it because she had no choice, stepping down onto the packed dirt street with legs that barely supported her weight. The mountain air was thinner here, making each breath feel inadequate, or perhaps that was just the panic constricting her chest. "Miss Sullivan." A deep voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Zara turned, and her heart stuttered. The man standing before her was tall, perhaps in his late 20s, with dark brown hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of fresh-turned earth. He wore denim trousers, scuffed leather boots, and a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. A worn leather vest completed the outfit, and a hat dangled from his hand as he regarded her with an expression she could not quite read. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am Zara Sullivan, Ethan Garrett." He did not smile, but his voice was gentle. "I appreciate you making the journey. I know it is not easy." Zara nodded mutely. Easy was not the word she would have chosen, terrifying perhaps. Desperate, certainly. When her father had died 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but gambling debts and angry creditors, Zara had found herself with precisely 2 options. Accept the unwanted advances of Mr. Pemberton, her father's former business associate who was 40 years her senior and had hands that wandered, or answer one of the advertisements seeking a bride out west. She had chosen the latter, responding to a simple notice placed by one Ethan Garrett of Challis, Idaho Territory. A rancher, he had written, in need of a wife. He had been honest in his letter, explaining that his days were long and the work was hard, but that he would provide for her and treat her with respect. There had been no flowery promises of love or romance, which Zara had actually appreciated. Her own parents' marriage had been one of convenience that had curdled into bitter resentment. At least, Ethan Garrett was being truthful about what this arrangement would be. Still, standing here now in this dusty town surrounded by mountains that seemed to scrape the sky, facing a man who was essentially a stranger, Zara felt fear wrap around her like a suffocating blanket. What did she really know about him? What if he was cruel? What if he drank or had a violent temper? She had heard stories of mail-order brides who found themselves trapped in nightmarish situations, miles from any help or hope of escape. "Your trunk?" Ethan asked, pulling her from her dark thoughts. "Yes, the brown one," Zara said, pointing with a shaking hand. Ethan moved to retrieve it, lifting the heavy trunk with an ease that spoke of considerable strength. Zara clasped her hands together to hide their trembling and tried to breathe normally. She was 22 years old, and she had survived her father's death, the loss of her childhood home, and a 3-week journey across the country. She could survive this too. "The ranch is about 5 miles north," Ethan said as he secured her trunk to the back of a sturdy-looking wagon. "It is not much, but the house is sound and the land is good." "I am sure it will be fine," Zara said automatically, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Ethan paused and looked at her more carefully. His brown eyes were thoughtful, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "Miss Sullivan, you look about ready to faint. There is a restaurant just there. Why don't we get you some food and water before we head out, give you a chance to catch your breath?" The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Zara felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "That would be appreciated, Mr. Garrett." "Ethan," he said. "We will be married tomorrow, so you might as well call me Ethan. Tomorrow, of course. That was how these arrangements worked. A quick ceremony at the courthouse, or with a traveling preacher, and then she would belong to this stranger in the eyes of God and the law." Zara nodded and allowed him to guide her toward a small establishment with a hand-painted sign that read, "Martha's Kitchen." Inside, the restaurant was dim and blessedly cool. Ethan pulled out a chair for her at a corner table, and Zara sank into it gratefully. A woman with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense expression approached. "Ethan Garrett, as I live and breathe," the woman said. "This must be your bride." "Miss Zara Sullivan," Ethan confirmed. "Zara, this is Martha Henderson. She makes the best apple pie in the territory." Martha's sharp eyes softened as she looked at Zara. "You look half-starved, girl. I will bring you a proper meal." Before Zara could protest, Martha had bustled away. Ethan settled into the chair across from her and set his hat on the table. "Martha feeds half the miners in this town for free when their luck runs out. She acts tough, but she has a good heart." Zara managed a small nod. Now that she was sitting, the full weight of exhaustion pressed down on her. She could feel Ethan watching her and forced herself to meet his gaze. "I know you are scared," he said quietly, and the directness of the statement startled her. "I suppose I would be too if I had just traveled across the country to marry a stranger." "I am fine," Zara lied. "You are terrified," Ethan corrected gently. "And that is understandable, but I meant what I wrote in my letters. I need a wife, and I will treat you with respect. You will have your own space until you are comfortable. There are 2 bedrooms in the house." Zara felt her cheeks flush. She had not even thought that far ahead, too consumed with generalized fear to consider the specific implications of marriage. The fact that he was offering her time and space made something in her chest loosen just a fraction. "Thank you," she whispered. Martha returned with 2 plates piled high with roast beef, potatoes, and vegetables that steamed in the cool air. There was also fresh bread with butter and 2 tall glasses of cold water. Zara's stomach growled audibly, and she felt her blush deepen. "Eat," Ethan said simply, and began working on his own meal. Zara picked up her fork and knife and cut a small piece of the roast beef. It was tender and flavorful, and despite her nerves, she found herself eating with genuine hunger. When was the last time she had eaten? She could not remember. The food at the way stations had been barely edible, and her anxiety had killed what little appetite she had. They ate in silence for several minutes. It was not an uncomfortable silence, exactly, but Zara was acutely aware of Ethan's presence across the table. He ate with the efficient manner of someone accustomed to manual labor, but he was not crude or slovenly. His hands were clean, though his fingernails bore the stains of honest work. He had a scar along his right jawline, faint but visible, and she found herself wondering about its origin. "May I ask you something?" Ethan said suddenly. Zara tensed but nodded. "Why did you answer my advertisement?" His brown eyes were curious but not unkind. "You are educated, that much is clear from your letters. You could have found work as a governess or a teacher back east." For a moment, Zara considered deflecting or offering a half-truth, but something about Ethan's straightforward manner made her want to be honest in return. "My father died owing a great deal of money," she said slowly. "The creditors took everything, including our home. I had a position as a companion to an elderly woman, but she passed away. After that, I had limited options. There was a man, Mr. Pemberton, who offered to settle my father's debts in exchange for my hand, but he was not a good man. I chose this instead. Ethan nodded slowly. I see. That took courage. Or desperation, Zara said with a bitter laugh. Perhaps both. He took a drink of water and set the glass down carefully. I will tell you my story too, so we start even. I came out here 5 years ago with my brother David. We worked as ranch hands, saved every penny, and finally bought our own land 2 years ago. Last winter, David was caught in a blizzard while checking on the cattle. He did not make it back. The pain in Ethan's voice was unmistakable, and Zara felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. I am so sorry. Thank you. Ethan's jaw tightened briefly. After that, I realized I could not manage the ranch alone. Not long term. I need help and I need a family. I want children someday if God wills it. But I am not the kind of man who is good at courting or sweet talk. So I placed an advertisement for a practical arrangement. A partnership. A partnership, Zara echoed. The word felt strange in her mouth, but not entirely unpleasant. It implied a degree of equality that she had not expected. Yes. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I know this is not what little girls dream about. There are no grand gestures or romantic declarations, but I can promise you honesty and a home, and time. Whatever you need, we will take it slow. Zara studied his face, searching for any hint of deception or hidden cruelty. She had become adept at reading people during the years of managing her father's unpredictable moods, but Ethan's expression remained open and sincere. Perhaps he truly meant what he said. Perhaps this could work. All right, she said softly. A partnership. I can try for that. Something that might have been relief crossed Ethan's features. That is all I ask. They finished their meal, and Martha refused to accept payment, waving away Ethan's coins with a firm shake of her head. Consider it a wedding present, she declared. And you bring this girl back to visit me, you hear? She looks like she could use a friend. Yes, madam, Ethan said with the first genuine smile Zara had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and more approachable. Outside, the afternoon sun had softened to a warm, golden glow. Ethan helped Zara up onto the wagon seat, and she arranged her skirts as he climbed up beside her. The horses, a matched pair of bays, tossed their heads as Ethan gathered the reins. The ride out of town took them through streets lined with rough wooden buildings. A general store, a saloon with raucous laughter spilling out, a blacksmith's forge where orange sparks flew. Then they were beyond the town limits, following a rutted road that climbed into rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and wildflowers. The Salmon River sparkled in the distance, a ribbon of silver against the autumn landscape. Despite her lingering fear, Zara could not help but appreciate the raw beauty of this place. The mountains rose all around them, their peaks dusted with early snow. The sky was a blue so vivid it almost hurt to look at. The air smelled of pine and earth and something indefinable that spoke of vast open spaces. It is beautiful, she said without thinking. Ethan glanced at her with surprise. You think so? Most people from back east find it too harsh. It is harsh, Zara agreed, but beautiful nonetheless. They rode in companionable silence after that. The wagon wheels creaked rhythmically, and the horses' hooves clip-clopped against the packed earth. Zara found herself relaxing incrementally, the tension in her shoulders easing just a bit. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the strange sense that Ethan Garrett was a man of his word, but she felt fractionally less terrified than she had an hour ago. When they rounded a bend, and the ranch came into view, Zara sat up straighter. It was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy log house with a covered porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and she could see cattle grazing in a distant pasture. Mountains formed a dramatic backdrop to the entire scene. "This is it," Ethan said. "The Garrett Ranch. Your home now, if you will have it. Your home." The words settled over Zara like a blanket. She had not had a home in so long. Not since her mother had died when Zara was 15 and her father had begun his slow descent into gambling and drinking. "It is lovely," she said, and meant it. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and jumped down, then came around to help Zara descend. His hands were warm and steady on her waist as he lifted her down, and for just a moment they stood close enough that Zara could smell the faint scent of leather and soap that clung to him. Then he stepped back, and the moment passed. "Let me show you inside," he said, retrieving her trunk from the wagon bed. The interior of the house was simple but clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and a small sitting area with 2 rocking chairs. Colorful rag rugs covered the plank floors, and the windows were fitted with actual glass, which was more than she had expected. "The larger bedroom is through that door," Ethan said, nodding to the right. "It has a decent bed and a wardrobe. The smaller bedroom is there." He indicated a door on the left. "I will take that one." "You do not have to," Zara protested automatically. "If it is your room, I can take the smaller one." "The larger room was David's," Ethan said quietly. "I have been sleeping in the small one since he passed. I prefer it." "Please, take the other room and make it your own." Zara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The gesture of consideration touched her more than she wanted to admit. Ethan carried her trunk into the larger bedroom, and Zara followed. The room was indeed spacious, with a large bed covered in a blue and white quilt, a tall wardrobe, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and even a small upholstered chair near the window that overlooked the mountains. "There are linens in the wardrobe," Ethan said, setting the trunk at the foot of the bed. "And I filled the pitcher with fresh water this morning. If you need anything else, just ask." "This is perfect," Zara said sincerely. "Thank you." Ethan nodded. "I need to tend to the horses and check on the cattle before dark. Make yourself comfortable. There is bread and cheese in the kitchen if you are hungry later. I will be back in a few hours." Then he was gone, the front door closing softly behind him. Zara stood alone in the quiet bedroom and finally allowed herself to let out the breath she had been holding for what felt like days. She crossed to the window and watched as Ethan unhitched the horses from the wagon and led them toward the barn. His movements were efficient and practiced, the motions of someone who knew his work intimately. Zara turned and surveyed her new room. Her room. She moved to the trunk and opened it, pulling out the few dresses she owned, her nightgown, her hairbrush and pins, the small leather journal that had been her mother's. She hung the dresses in the wardrobe and arranged her other belongings on the washstand and the small shelf above it. The room began to look lived in, and some of the strangeness of it all began to fade. When her things were unpacked, Zara removed her dusty traveling dress and washed her face and hands in the basin. The water was cool and refreshing, and she felt more human afterward. She changed into her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that her mother had made years ago. It was worn but clean, and it felt like armor of sorts. Zara ventured into the main room and looked around more carefully. The kitchen area was well stocked with basic supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, dried beans. A ham hung from a hook near the larder. Pots and pans dangled from nails above the stove. Everything was organized in a way that suggested Ethan Garrett was a man who appreciated order. She found the bread and cheese he had mentioned and cut small portions of each, though her stomach was still full from Martha's generous meal. She sat at the table and nibbled, looking around at this space that was supposed to become her home. The light through the windows turned gold, then amber, then the soft purple of twilight. Zara lit 2 oil lamps, one on the table and one on the mantel, and the warm glow pushed back the growing darkness. She heard Ethan's boots on the porch steps before the door opened, and he entered carrying a bucket of milk. "One of the cows freshened last month," he explained, setting the bucket on the kitchen counter. "I will strain this and put it in the cold box." Zara watched as he worked, using a piece of cheesecloth to strain the milk into a clean jar. His movements were practiced and efficient. When he was done, he washed his hands in a basin and dried them on a towel. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "Well enough," Zara replied. "The room is very comfortable." Ethan nodded. "Good. I know you must be exhausted. I imagine you will want to turn in early." "Yes," Zara admitted. "The journey was quite long. Before you do, I should tell you about tomorrow." Ethan leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed but his expression serious. "The circuit preacher comes through Challis once a month. Tomorrow is his day. I arranged for him to marry us at 10 o'clock at the courthouse. It will be quick and simple. Martha Henderson has agreed to stand as witness, along with the courthouse clerk." Zara's heart began to race again. Tomorrow? She would be married tomorrow. "All right," she managed. "After that, we can stop at the general store if you need anything. Fabric for dresses, household items, whatever you require. Then we will come back here." He paused. "I know this is all happening very fast. If you need more time, I can ask the preacher to wait until next month." The offer surprised her. "You would do that, of course." Ethan met her eyes steadily. "This only works if we both choose it. I will not force you into anything, Zara." It was the first time he had used her given name without the title, and hearing it in his deep voice did strange things to her pulse. "No," she said slowly. "Tomorrow is fine." There is no point in delaying the inevitable. Something flickered across Ethan's face, an emotion she could not quite name. "As you wish. I will wake early to do the morning chores, then we will leave for town around 8. Does that suit you?" "Yes." "Good." Ethan straightened. "I will bid you good night then." "Good night," Zara echoed. She watched him disappear into his small bedroom, then made her way to her own. She changed into her nightgown, braided her hair, and climbed into the bed. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, stuffed with what felt like good feather ticking. The quilt was soft and warm. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, more stars than she had ever seen in Philadelphia, where the city lights washed them out. Zara closed her eyes and willed herself to sleep, but her mind spun with thoughts and worries. Tomorrow she would marry a man she barely knew. She would promise to honor and obey him for the rest of her life. What if she was making a terrible mistake? What if Ethan's kindness was an act that would drop away once the vows were spoken? But exhaustion eventually won over anxiety, and Zara drifted into a fitful sleep filled with fragmented dreams of mountains and horses and brown eyes that watched her with an expression she could not quite decipher. She woke to the sound of someone moving around in the main room and the smell of coffee brewing. Pale dawn light filtered through the window. Zara lay still for a moment, orienting herself, then rose and dressed quickly in her best dress, a dove-gray silk that had seen better days but was still respectable. She pinned her dark hair up carefully and looked at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her green eyes looked enormous in her pale face, and she pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them. When she emerged from her room, Ethan was standing at the stove frying eggs and bacon. He had shaved and changed into clean clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt, and a black vest. He looked up when he heard her and nodded in greeting. "Good morning. I made coffee and breakfast. I hope you are hungry." "Good morning," Zara replied. "That smells wonderful." They ate together at the table, and Zara found that her appetite had returned despite her nerves. The food was simple but well prepared, and the coffee was strong and hot. Ethan did not talk much, but the silence felt comfortable rather than strained. After breakfast, Ethan hitched the horses to the wagon again, and they set out for Challis. The morning was crisp and clear, with a hint of frost on the ground that would burn off as the sun climbed higher. Zara wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders and tried to calm her racing thoughts. The town was busier than it had been the previous afternoon. Miners heading to their claims, women with baskets doing their marketing, children chasing each other down the street. The courthouse was a simple wooden building near the center of town, and Ethan guided the wagon to a stop in front of it. Inside, the air was stuffy and smelled of dust and old paper. A clerk with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from his desk as they entered. "Ethan Garrett," he said, rising. "Right on time. The preacher just arrived. I will fetch him." Within minutes, a portly man with a fringe of white hair and kind blue eyes entered the room, followed by Martha Henderson, who was dressed in her Sunday best and carrying a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers. "For you, dear," Martha said, pressing the flowers into Zara's hands. Every bride should have flowers. Zara felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. The ceremony itself was brief and matter-of-fact. The preacher, whose name was Reverend Charles, had a deep, sonorous voice that filled the small room as he recited the traditional vows. Zara repeated her lines in a voice that trembled only slightly, and Ethan spoke his in a firm, steady tone that somehow calmed her nerves. When it came time to exchange rings, Ethan produced a simple gold band that looked old and well-worn. "It was my mother's," he said quietly, slipping it onto Zara's finger. "I hope you do not mind." "I do not mind," Zara said, touched by the gesture. She had not expected a ring at all, much less one with such obvious sentimental value. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Charles intoned. Ethan hesitated for just a moment, then leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to Zara's lips. It was brief and gentle, over almost before it began, but Zara felt the warmth of it spread through her chest. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Garrett," the preacher said with a smile. "Mrs. Garrett." Zara turned the name over in her mind as she and Ethan signed the marriage certificate. Zara Garrett. It sounded foreign and strange, but not entirely unpleasant. Martha hugged them both and made them promise again to visit her soon. The courthouse clerk offered his congratulations. Then they were back outside in the bright morning sunshine, married. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked as he helped her into the wagon. "Strange," Zara admitted, "but all right, I think." "That is honest." Ethan climbed up beside her. "Would you like to go to the general store now, or would you prefer to head back to the ranch?" "The store, please," Zara said, "if you do not mind." "Not at all." The general store was a large establishment that smelled of coffee, leather, and spices. The proprietor, a cheerful man named Mr. Dawson, greeted Ethan warmly and congratulated him on his marriage. Ethan introduced Zara and then said, "My wife needs fabric and whatever else she requires. Put it on my account." "Of course," Mr. Dawson said. "Mrs. Garrett, please look around. We have a good selection of dry goods in the back." Zara spent the next hour selecting fabric for new dresses, thread, needles, and a few other household items she thought might be useful. Ethan wandered the store, occasionally adding items to the pile. A new cast iron skillet, lamp oil, sugar, flour. He did not question any of her choices or try to limit her selections, which surprised her. Her father had always been tight-fisted with money, questioning every expenditure. When they left the store, the wagon bed was full of parcels wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. The drive back to the ranch felt different somehow. Perhaps it was the gold band on Zara's finger or the knowledge that she was now legally bound to the man beside her, but something had shifted. Back at the ranch, they worked together to unload the wagon and put away the supplies. It felt domestic and oddly comfortable, this working side by side. Ethan did not hover or give orders. He simply did his share of the work and trusted Zara to do hers. As the days turned into weeks, a routine began to establish itself. Ethan rose before dawn to tend the animals and do the heavy ranch work. Zara took over the cooking and housekeeping, tasks she had learned from her mother and had continued to do even during her father's decline. She baked bread, churned butter, tended the small vegetable garden behind the house that still had a few late squash and pumpkins. She mended Ethan's clothes and made herself 2 new dresses from the fabric they had purchased. In the evenings, they would sit together in the main room. Ethan would read farming journals or work on tack repairs while Zara sewed or wrote in her journal. They talked, tentatively at first and then more freely, about small things: the weather, the cattle, the latest news from town. Ethan told her about the ranch and his plans to expand the herd. Zara told him about Philadelphia, about her mother's flower garden, about the books she had loved to read. The fear that had gripped Zara so tightly when she first arrived began to loosen its hold. Ethan was patient and kind, never pushing her, never demanding more than she was ready to give. He kept his word about the separate bedrooms, never once suggesting they change the arrangement. At night, Zara would lie in her bed and listen to the sounds of the ranch, the wind in the pines, the distant howl of a coyote, the occasional low of a cow. Slowly, impossibly, it began to feel like home. One afternoon in late October, Zara was in the kitchen making apple preserves from fruit Martha had given them when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats approaching. She looked out the window to see Ethan riding in fast on his horse, and her heart leapt into her throat. Something was wrong. She hurried outside as he dismounted. "What is it?" "There is a storm coming," Ethan said, his face tight with concern. "A bad one. I can feel it in the air, and the cattle are spooked. I need to get them closer to the barn, into the near pasture where they will have more shelter. It is going to take me hours, and I need to start now." "What can I do to help?" Zara asked immediately. Ethan looked surprised. "Do you know how to ride?" "Yes. My mother taught me when I was young." "All right." Ethan's expression cleared with relief. "Come on, I will saddle a horse for you." Within minutes, Zara was mounted on a gentle mare named Daisy, wearing one of Ethan's spare coats against the cold wind that had begun to blow. They rode out together to the far pasture where the cattle grazed, and Ethan quickly explained what needed to be done. They had to circle the herd and drive them toward the near pasture without spooking them into a stampede. It was hard, exhausting work. The cattle were stubborn and the wind grew stronger, whipping Zara's hair loose from its pins and stinging her cheeks. But she followed Ethan's lead, calling to the cows and guiding Daisy to turn back any that tried to break away from the herd. Her legs ached from gripping the saddle, and her hands grew numb from the cold, but she did not stop. By the time they got the last of the cattle into the near pasture and secured the gate, the sky had turned an ominous dark gray. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, and Ethan shouted, "Ride for the barn." They galloped across the open ground, the rain turning from drops to sheets within seconds. By the time they reached the barn and got the horses inside, they were both soaked through. Ethan quickly unsaddled both horses and rubbed them down while Zara hung their saddles and bridles to dry. The rain hammered on the barn roof, and thunder rumbled overhead. "We will have to wait it out," Ethan said, breathing hard from exertion. "It is too dangerous to try to reach the house right now." The barn was dry and smelled of hay and horses. Ethan found a couple of horse blankets and handed one to Zara. "Here, try to get warm." Zara wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, but she was shivering violently now, her teeth chattering. Ethan looked at her with concern, then did something that surprised them both. He sat down in the hay beside her and pulled her against his side, wrapping his own blanket around them both. "Body heat," he said gruffly. "You will warm up faster this way." Zara was too cold to protest. She huddled against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body seeping into her chilled frame. They sat like that in silence, listening to the storm rage outside. Gradually, the shivering subsided, and Zara became acutely aware of other things. The steady thump of Ethan's heart against her ear, the strength of his arm around her shoulders, the surprisingly pleasant scent of him even soaked with rain. "Thank you for your help today," Ethan said quietly. "I could not have done it without you." "I am glad I could help," Zara replied. "That is what partners do, is it not?" she felt rather than heard his soft laugh. "Yes, that is what partners do." They stayed in the barn for over an hour until the worst of the storm passed. By the time they made a run for the house, it was late afternoon, and the rain had settled into a steady drizzle. Inside, they peeled off their wet outer layers and hung them near the fireplace. Ethan built up the fire while Zara changed into dry clothes and then made hot coffee and warmed up leftover stew. That night, as they sat by the fire eating their meal, something felt different between them. The easy companionship they had been building had deepened into something more. They had worked together, weathered a crisis together, and come through it as a team. Zara found herself watching Ethan when he was not looking, noticing the way the firelight played across his features, the way his hands moved with such sureness and capability. She was developing feelings for him, Zara realized with a start. Real feelings that went beyond gratitude or respect. The thought terrified her, but it also filled her with a strange, tentative hope. November brought the first real snow, and with it, a new set of challenges and rhythms. The work of the ranch changed. There was more time spent breaking ice on water troughs, carrying hay to the cattle, splitting wood for the insatiable stove and fireplace. But there were also moments of unexpected beauty and peace. One morning, Zara woke to find the world transformed into a crystalline wonderland. Snow blanketed everything, softening the harsh edges of the landscape. She dressed quickly and went outside, unable to resist the pull of that pristine whiteness. Ethan was already up, making his way back from the barn, and he stopped when he saw her standing on the porch with snow dusting her hair. "First snow of the season," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What do you think?" "It is magical," Zara breathed, and then felt foolish for such a childish sentiment. But Ethan's smile widened. "It is it not? No matter how many winters I see out here, the first snow always feels like something special." They stood together watching the sun rise over the snow-covered mountains, and Zara felt a contentment she had not experienced in years. This place, this man, this life, it was nothing like what she had imagined for herself, but it was becoming something she treasured. As winter deepened, the evenings grew longer and the time spent inside together increased. Ethan taught Zara to play chess using a set his brother had carved from wood, and she taught him to play the card games her mother had loved. They talked more freely now, sharing stories from their pasts, their hopes for the future, their opinions on everything from politics to the best way to make biscuits. One night in early December, Zara looked up from her sewing to find Ethan watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated, then said, "I have been thinking. We have been married for 2 months now. I know I promised you time, and I meant it. But I want you to know that I have come to care for you a great deal, Zara. You are not just a business arrangement to me anymore. You are my wife in truth, and I am grateful every day that you answered my advertisement." Zara's heart hammered in her chest. "I have come to care for you too," she admitted. "More than I expected. You have been so patient with me, so kind. You have given me a home and a purpose. But more than that, you have given me hope." Ethan rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat. He knelt beside her, taking one of her hands in both of his. "Then may I court you properly? I know we did this all backwards, but I would like to do this right. I want to win your heart, Zara, if you will let me try." Tears sprang to Zara's eyes, but they were happy tears. "You already have my heart," she whispered. "I think you have had it for weeks now. I was just too afraid to say so." The smile that broke across Ethan's face was radiant. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Then may I kiss you, as a husband should kiss his wife?" "Yes," Zara breathed. Ethan rose and drew her up with him. He cupped her face in his calloused hands and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was nothing like the brief, chaste touch at their wedding. This was deep and searching and full of promise. Zara's hands came up to grip his shoulders, and she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Zara Garrett." "I love you too," Zara said, and the words felt like a vow, more binding even than the ones they had spoken in the courthouse. That night, Zara moved her things into the larger bedroom that they now shared. Ethan was gentle and patient, and if Zara was nervous, his tenderness soon melted her fears away. They came together as husband and wife in truth, and afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Zara felt a peace and rightness she had never known before. The winter passed in a haze of contentment. Zara and Ethan worked together, laughed together, and loved each other with a depth that surprised them both. The ranch became a true home, filled with warmth and purpose. They celebrated Christmas with Martha Henderson and a few other neighbors, and Ethan gave Zara a beautiful shawl he had ordered special from a catalog. Zara gave him a new leather journal where he could keep track of the ranch accounts, with his initials tooled into the cover by the town leatherworker. When spring arrived and the snow began to melt, Zara discovered she was with child. She told Ethan one morning over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then he let out a whoop of joy, swept her up in his arms, and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Zara confirmed, her own joy bubbling up. "In the fall, I think." Ethan became even more protective and attentive as Zara's belly began to swell. He would not let her do heavy work, taking over tasks she had previously handled. Zara sometimes chafed at the restrictions, but she could not be truly annoyed when it came from such obvious love and concern. As summer ripened into autumn, the baby grew, and so did Zara's anticipation and nervousness. Martha Henderson visited frequently, bringing practical advice and reassurance. She had helped birth many babies in Challis and promised to be there when Zara's time came. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year and 1 month after Zara had first arrived in Challis, the labor pains began. Ethan rode into town at breakneck speed to fetch Martha, then paced outside the bedroom door while Martha and a neighbor woman tended to Zara. It was a long labor, lasting through the day and into the night. Ethan wore a path in the floorboards with his pacing, praying silently for his wife's safety. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard the thin, reedy cry of a newborn. Martha emerged from the bedroom, beaming. "You have a son, Ethan. A healthy baby boy, and your wife is tired but well." Ethan rushed into the room to find Zara propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "We have a son," she said wonderingly. Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving one miniature fist in the air. Love, fierce and overwhelming, crashed over Ethan. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Zara said. She looked down at their son. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, unable to agree. But now, looking at this new life they had created together, Ethan said, "What about David, after my brother?" Zara's eyes softened. "David Garrett. I think that is perfect." Little David grew and thrived under the loving care of his parents. He was a happy baby with his father's brown eyes and his mother's dark hair. The ranch prospered too. Ethan added more cattle to the herd and built a new barn with the help of neighbors. Zara tended a much larger garden and learned to preserve enough food to see them through the long winters. 2 years later, Zara gave birth again, this time to a daughter they named Clara, after Zara's mother. Clara had her mother's green eyes and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. The house rang with children's laughter, and Zara could hardly remember the frightened, desperate woman she had been when she first stepped off that stagecoach. One evening, when David was 4 and Clara was 2, Zara stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Ethan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was thinking about the day I arrived," Zara said. "I was so terrified, I thought I was making the worst mistake of my life. And now," Ethan's voice held a smile, "now I know it was the best decision I ever made." Zara turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me everything, Ethan. A home, a family, love. You replaced all my fear with trust and hope." "We gave that to each other," Ethan corrected gently. "You took a chance on a lonely cowboy in the middle of nowhere. You made this place a home. You gave me a family and a reason to wake up grateful every morning. I am the fortunate one." "Then we are both fortunate," Zara said, standing on her toes to kiss him. From inside the house came the sound of David calling for his parents, probably having woken from his nap. Clara would not be far behind. Ethan and Zara smiled at each other and went inside to their children, their home, their life together. The years continued to pass in a sweet rhythm of work and love. David grew tall and strong, following his father around the ranch and learning everything Ethan could teach him about cattle and horses and the land. Clara proved to have a talent for growing things, taking over more and more of the garden as she got older. She also loved to read, and Zara spent many happy hours teaching her daughter letters and numbers and sharing her favorite books. Zara and Ethan added 2 more children to their family, another son named Thomas and a second daughter named Margaret. The house that had once seemed so spacious now felt comfortably full, bursting with noise and activity and love. The ranch continued to prosper. Ethan's careful management and hard work paid off, and the Garrett Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place that raised quality cattle. They hired a few ranch hands to help with the increased work, and Ethan built them a bunkhouse near the barn. Zara kept up with the cooking for the expanded household, though David's wife, Anna, whom he married when he was 23, eventually took over much of that responsibility. Yes, the years brought their share of challenges too. There were harsh winters when they lost cattle to cold and starvation. There was the year of the drought when the creek ran dry and they had to haul water from the river. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal tribulations of life. But they faced everything together, Zara and Ethan, their partnership as strong as ever. Martha Henderson remained a close friend until her death at the venerable age of 78. The whole town turned out for her funeral, and Zara wept for the woman who had shown her kindness when she was a frightened stranger in a strange land. As Zara and Ethan grew older, their children and eventually grandchildren surrounded them. The ranch passed to David, but Zara and Ethan remained in the main house, now expanded with additional rooms to accommodate family gatherings. They spent their days in comfortable routine. Ethan still helped with the ranch work, though his movements were slower now, and Zara tended her flower garden and sewed clothes for the grandchildren. One summer evening, when Zara was 65 and Ethan was 68, they sat together on the porch in their rocking chairs, watching the sun set over the same mountains they had watched for over 40 years. Their hands were clasped between the chairs, fingers intertwined. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Leaving Philadelphia, answering my advertisement." Zara looked at him with surprise. "Never, not once. Do you regret placing it?" "Not for a single moment." Ethan squeezed her hand. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zara Garrett. Every day with you has been a gift." "And you are mine," Zara said softly. "You taught me what love really means. You showed me that trust can be earned one gentle day at a time. You replaced all my fear with hope and joy and a life more wonderful than I ever dreamed possible." "We built a good life," Ethan said, looking out over the ranch, where lights were beginning to glow in the windows of the various buildings. Grandchildren's laughter drifted on the evening air. "The best life," Zara agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their first awkward conversations, their growing love, their joys and sorrows, and everything that had made up their life together. The ranch was peaceful in the gathering darkness, a testament to everything they had built together. Inside, someone called them for dinner, but they lingered a moment longer, savoring the quiet peace of the evening and the presence of each other. Then Ethan stood and offered his hand to Zara, helping her up from her chair as he had done thousands of times before. Hand in hand, they walked into the warm, lamp-lit house filled with the voices of their family. The fear that had brought Zara to this place so long ago had been transformed entirely, replaced by love and trust that had only deepened with time. It was a love story that had begun with hesitation and uncertainty, but had grown into something beautiful and enduring, a love that would continue on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch itself, and in the mountains that watched over it all. The circle was complete, the story told. Zara Sullivan had arrived in Challis as a frightened mail-order bride, and Zara Garrett would leave it someday as a woman who had been deeply loved and who had loved deeply in return. She had found home, not in a place but in a person, and that person had kept every promise he had ever made to her. Ethan had replaced her fear with trust, one gentle day at a time, and in doing so, they had created something extraordinary together. A life filled with purpose, family, and enduring love. Their legacy lived on in the children who worked the land, and in the grandchildren, who played in the fields where Zara and Ethan had once labored side by side. The Garrett Ranch stood as a monument to what could be built on a foundation of honesty, respect, and love that started slowly, but grew into something unshakable. On quiet evenings, when the work was done, and the family gathered for supper, Stories would be told of how grandmother Zara had come from Philadelphia as a mail-order bride, how grandfather Ethan had courted her after their marriage rather than before, and how their love had grown into something legendary in the family lore. The younger children would listen with wide eyes, and the older ones would smile, having heard the tale many times but never tiring of it. Years later, when both Zara and Ethan had passed on, peacefully and within months of each other, the family would gather at the ranch for the reading of their final wishes. They had left the ranch to David, as expected, but they had also left letters for each of their children and grandchildren, letters filled with wisdom and love and memories. In Zara's letter to her granddaughters, she wrote about courage and trust, about taking chances and building something meaningful. She wrote about how fear could be transformed by love, how gentleness could be stronger than force, and how a partnership built on mutual respect could weather any storm. In Ethan's letters to his grandsons, he wrote about the value of keeping promises, about treating women with respect and honor, and about how the greatest strength a man could show was in his gentleness and patience. He wrote about how love was not just a feeling but a choice made every day, in big gestures and small acts of kindness. The Garrett Ranch continued for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the family story. But the foundation remained the same: the love between Zara and Ethan, a love that had started with a desperate advertisement in a newspaper and had grown into something that transcended time and touched every life that came after. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whistled through the pines and the mountains stood sentinel over the valley, those who were sensitive to such things might feel the presence of that love still lingering in the old ranch house, in the paths Zara and Ethan had walked together, in the very land they had worked side by side. It was a love that had conquered fear, a trust that had been built one gentle day at a time, and it remained as enduring as the mountains themselves. The story of Zara and Ethan Garrett became more than just a family legend. It became a testament to the power of taking chances, of choosing love even when it is frightening, and of the incredible things that can grow when two people commit to building something together. It was a reminder that the greatest love stories are not always the ones that start with passion and romance, but sometimes the ones that begin with fear and uncertainty and transform, through patience and dedication, into something profound and lasting. Their love had started with a stagecoach arrival and a trembling young woman, a lonely cowboy with kind eyes, and a promise to take things slow. It had grown through shared work and quiet evenings, through storms weathered together and joys celebrated as one. It had deepened with the birth of children and the passing of years, becoming richer and more complex with each season that turned. And in the end, when all was said and done, Zara and Ethan Garrett had achieved what so few ever do: a love that was true and deep and lasting, a partnership that enriched both their lives immeasurably, and a legacy that would continue to inspire and guide generations to come. They had taken the raw materials of fear and loneliness and uncertainty, and they had forged from them something beautiful and enduring. The mail-order bride who had arrived with fear had found in her cowboy husband someone who replaced that fear with trust, one gentle day at a time, until fear was nothing but a distant memory, and all that remained was love, pure and simple and everlasting.